Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. It's the Virta webinar on application migration to Microsoft Azure. My name is Michael Nix, Client Executive, and we also have here Scott Slater, our Customer Success Manager and Key Technical Resource out in the field. The goal of today's session is to discuss some of the challenges and methods for migrating applications to the cloud, specifically Microsoft Azure, as opposed to rebuilding them yourself, which seems to be kind of the mode du jour when talking about cloud migration and digital transformation. So the goal is just a few slides to talk about some of the issues, some of the challenges, some of the best practices, a little bit on Virta and the solution that we offer our clients to assist them with application migration, and then I'll flip things over to Scott to run through a demo to show you how that's actually managed. So Virta is primarily used to work with our clients to keep their business critical applications current. In a cloud context, what this means is we're not talking software as a service, where you don't really have any control over the software or the data or the operating system. We're talking primarily on Microsoft Azure infrastructure as a service, where you as a customer would have complete ownership of the operating system, the application, and the data itself. The problem with a lot of the conversations that I see around digital transformation and cloud is it's either primarily focused on a software as a service model, or it presupposes that you as an enterprise, as a business, are building applications from scratch that are purpose-built to take advantage of the cloud. So we talk a lot about DevOps and continuous improvement, and Docker containers with REST APIs and all that stuff. One of the main issues there is there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of millions of applications already deployed or pre-built by enterprises that are in use today. Not only are they in use today, but they've been in use for years, decades perhaps, and they've become critical to the business. Not only is that's where all the data is, but all the users, thousands of users in the case of larger enterprises, are already trained on these applications. And a lot of enterprises have taken the, well, if it's not broken, don't fix it attitude when keeping them up to date, simply because, there's an operational risk component to upgrading an operating system for a custom-built app, because we've all been in the situation where a patch, breaks some sort of critical functionality and you're down for hours or a day or two, losing money all the while. So what we do is we take the approach where we can help our customers migrate to the cloud, specifically Azure, and modernize those operating systems, so that not only can you take full advantage of the cloud in terms of flexibility, in terms of scalability, but also some of the more cloud-specific applications like the containerization and orchestration for applications that do need to scale in real time. From our perspective, we don't require, there are a few ways to migrate to the cloud that we see out there. There's the P2V tools that will just copy your hard drive, but all you're really doing is moving an old legacy system into a new environment, and there's a significant overhead when dealing with legacy systems in a new environment, such as a cloud system. You've got either these defunct or inaccessible applications that you would have to move, either migrate manually or rebuild from scratch. But if you don't have the access to the expertise, or you don't have access to the installing it because, for example, it's an old Nortel application and they've been bankrupt for 10 years, and everything is, of course, out of support, there's not a lot of options for you. Or if you've, 15 years ago, you've had a slew of custom-built applications spread across your enterprise, whose dependencies you might not fully understand, migrating those to a new cloud environment where not just the underlying operating system might be new, but the network architecture might be completely different. There are no simple answers necessarily when migrating these applications to these environments, simply because the experts that you would need to go through and understand to understand completely these applications and their dependencies just doesn't exist. So that's where Virta comes in. We can help our customers keep those business critical applications current, bringing them to new operating systems, new environments. It doesn't matter where they are, but especially we are native built for the cloud, especially Microsoft Azure, given our focus on Windows itself. we're here to talk primarily about cloud migration, but my background is security. And it's very interesting talking about cloud security. No one really has it figured out yet. Primarily when we talk about security, people talk about software as a service, the Salesforces of the world, where you really have to leave it up to the vendor to make sure that your data is encrypted and that you have the right access controls. Everything else is kind of up in the air. We don't really have a lot of visibility into these systems because we don't have a lot of ownership in them. When it comes to infrastructure as a service, something like Azure, for example, while the physical and network security is actually very well done by the Microsoft teams, you as an organization still have complete ownership of the operating system and the application. And the reason I joined Virta, coming from security, is the realization that 99% of all hacks can be prevented if you keep operating systems and applications up to date, if you have good patching in place. Unfortunately, when you have 10,000 servers and tens of thousands or thousands of applications running on those servers, it's not necessarily feasible to keep those things up to date when there's a huge operational risk to doing so, and you might not even have the resources to do so. It's a fairly labor-intensive process, even with the automated patching tools, simply because of testing to deal with the operational risk of a patch breaking a system. As you can hopefully understand, when you then try to migrate all of these apps to the cloud, you are taking, if you are migrating, say, Windows Server 2003 and putting it into Azure, while Microsoft will let you do that, I'm told they don't exactly enjoy the process, simply because you cannot take advantage of a lot of new things. The latest security technologies will not run on operating systems that old. They just won't. So you are left to deal with, you've got this giant gap in your visibility when it comes to your security posture. Similarly, when it comes to the standard DevOps tools, containers is a big thing, orchestration is a big thing. If they run at all on these legacy systems, there is a performance hit. You have to have some other level of abstraction or virtualization to take advantage of them. And at that point, why go through that effort if you're just kind of going to make the experience worse? Also, when migrating to the cloud, most people kind of choose a default template for the size of the operating system that they're moving things to. They don't really have a good understanding of the technical requirements of the applications that they're using. As a result, we see a lot of people overpaying simply because they've over-provisioned their cloud instances for the workloads that they actually need, or they're moving workloads that they don't necessarily need anymore. So when we talk about cloud migration and security, it's about how do we, mitigate the security concerns while eliminating the operational risk of modernizing these systems, and not just modernizing when bringing them to a new operating system, but modernizing them when bringing them to a new environment, such as someone else's data center available in the public cloud. The way Virta handles this is through our Migration Intelligence Suite. I love this quote from one of our customers that works with Pat's Brewing Company. They were able to take a legacy, I think it was Microsoft Great Plains application, and bring it to the cloud. And they had actually planned 3 weeks to do this migration for a lot of the same reasons. It was running on an old version of Windows Server. I think it was 2003. They wanted to bring it straight up to Windows Server 2016 so that they could take advantage of the full virtualization capabilities and stuff like Docker, for example, and they could put new security controls on the operating system itself. But Great Plains is a highly customizable application. You can buy a lot of extra widgets that plug into every facet of your business. And the problem was the people that had originally deployed this system no longer work for the company. They hired external consultancies, cloud migrators, who had a Great Plains expert on staff. And they actually had planned out 3 weeks for this guy to go in and do nothing but an archaeological expedition into Microsoft Great Plains to figure out how it was configured, how it was set up, what modules were being used, and then somehow magically bring this not only to a new operating system that has a completely different file structure and dependencies on the network itself, but also put this into a public cloud as well. So they estimated 3 weeks. They don't really know how long it took, how long it would have taken to do this migration manually, because they reached out to us and we were able to work with them. and we were able to discover all of the application dependencies, all the configuration, all of the services and users that they needed that this application needed to be used effectively, and we were able to wrap that up and bring it into the cloud for them. And the quote that we have here is in under an hour, which is a huge cost savings. And that's just one application. If you've got thousands of applications, 3 weeks to effectively a 3-week time saving per application adds up to man years, which is millions of dollars over the life cycle of a modernization project. The primary tool that we use to do migrations is our V-Migrate tool, which is an application that you install on your destination server. It then connects back to the source server, and you figure out all the applications that you want to bring over, and it manages that entire process. I'm going to hand things over to Scott in a second. That's primarily what he'll work through, is that workflow to help you understand how it is that we're actually able to do this magical thing, such as bring really old applications on really old systems to modern systems. We also have a larger suite of products that include V-Monitor. V-Monitor is an agent that we install on the source server itself, and that's how we can automatically understand the dependencies of the applications themselves. You let it run for a couple of weeks to figure out, exactly what files, what folders, what services, what users, what permissions are required for this application to run properly, and then we can, use that information to help automate the migration process. V-Maestro is our orchestration suite, which kind of manages the connection between V-Monitor and V-Migrate, especially useful for large environments, as it aggregates all of the information collected from V-Monitor agents across the enterprise, puts them in one place, and makes planning infinitely more effective than having to manually go through each application, go find stakeholders across the organization, understand their concerns, especially when migrating to a new environment, and then figuring out exactly how to do that, especially if you have applications spread across multiple systems, like a database that's sitting with a DBA team, doesn't really talk to, the business logic or the front end server guys, and you've just got, instead of one person and one expert, you've got 3 teams that you have to deal with. So just to give you an idea of what that actually means, here's just a quick view of a very high level of the applications that we can detect within an environment. So this is one of the views in V-Maestro. We talked about it being our orchestration tool as well. What it allows you to do is get a complete understanding of all of the applications installed in your environment on all of the servers that we've implemented the V-Monitor agent on. We can then use this information to map application and server dependencies. So understanding not just what applications are on what servers, not just understanding how many applications you have out there, but understanding, what else they need to operate. Does this web server also talk to a database? Is there another app that talks to, Microsoft Visual that requires Visual Studio to run, or is there some deprecated Java library somewhere? We can help you understand all of these necessary components that are required for the successful running of the application. A key thing, again, is discovering the application user base, understanding which users are actually using the application, or if no one is. We've seen a couple of situations where there's just these apps that have been around forever, and they're more or less still supported by the enterprise, but no one's really using them. So is it because there's another alternative and they forgot to decommission it? So we can help you understand whether or not we can decommission those things, so you don't actually have to spend the time and money provisioning cloud instances to move this stuff over that just isn't necessary for your business anymore. And then capacity planning is a big thing for our customers undergoing a cloud migration. As I said before, a lot of people, they will get requests to spin up a cloud instance just based on a default understanding of what it takes to run an application. But if you've got an application that's 15 years old running on Windows Server 2003, maybe you don't need, to fill up an entire virtual machine with 8 gigs of RAM if it's just running some basic stuff and you just want to give people more access to it. So through the visibility that we give you through V-Maestro and V-Monitor, we can help you understand exactly the technical requirements of the application are. And then finally, as an orchestration tool, we can actually help you automatically migrate applications as opposed to doing it manually using the V-Migrate tool in and of itself. So in terms of capacity planning, here's just some of the things some of the pieces of information that we can give you. the name of the server itself, the operating systems that we're dealing with, the actual physical architecture, 64-bit, 32-bit. This is important when dealing with legacy applications, especially if you have some 16-bit stuff lying around in some really old, server 2000 stuff. 16-bit stuff just doesn't work on 64-bit, for example. So if you can identify that ahead of time, while you won't be able to migrate it, you can figure out and work with the business to understand if there's any compensating controls or other applications that you can then utilize as well. CPU, memory, disk space, all of these things, all this is very useful information when planning your cloud capacity, simply because now you know that what exactly each application requires, each application component requires, and you can provision properly and correctly. And then if you need to scale up from there, because you're on a modern operating system, you can take advantage of some of those tools that are built into the cloud, which is the reason we want to go to the cloud anyway. Flexibility, scalability. Again, just to give you an idea of what capacity planning could look like, the bottom there, that's one server that we use for demo purposes. And there's 3 applications running on that server. We're monitoring each one of those. Each one, we get an understanding of how much CPU it's using, how much memory it's using, and totally on the system itself, just how big that server is to help you further plan capacity. Dependencies is always the tricky thing, especially when you're coming to multi-server applications. V-Maestro figures this out automatically by understanding over what ports and what IP address and host names your applications are trying to communicate to. So the blue dot in the middle there, I don't know if you recognize that host name, but that is the same as we had in the previous slide. And as we can see, we've been able to detect that it is communicating with these other servers. The reason that they're question marks is we don't have agents deployed, but from here, if we do have the correct credentials for those applications, we can deploy them remotely or have someone go track it down and see if we can figure out what's exactly is on that and what components are necessary. So in this way, we can understand exactly, not just the application dependencies on the server itself, but across your environment. And this is especially important when migrating to the cloud because the network architecture is different. If you're communicating primarily over port 443 or some telnet port or something like that to go through network zones internally, do you want to change that network architecture as you migrate to the cloud to make things a little bit more responsive or effective or even more secure? Instead of having all your databases in one place, do you want to have all your applications and their components in one place, whether it's physically on one host machine with a bunch of VMs or containers on top, or spread out in a data center or spread out globally? We can help give you that visibility when you do the planning for your cloud migration. When it comes to V-Monitor itself, like I said, that's the agent that collects the data that reports it back to V-Maestro. The way it works is it just watches application calls to the operating system. So as your application starts using resources, accessing files, accessing tasks, communicating over the network, we can give you an understanding of exactly what's going on. So collecting those usage patterns, discovering all the application configuration files. And the key thing for this is, especially after migration to the new operating system, we can help you reduce the testing and QA cycles, because we only want to move what's needed to go for the application to run on those modern systems. We don't need to know any of the stuff that's just not necessary. If there's multiple apps on one machine, you don't need to do any kind of complicated QA testing or have any complicated stakeholders or subject matter experts that just aren't necessary for a specific application. So we can tell you definitively exactly what's required for each app and move only those components. And then finally, V-Migrate is the bread and butter of our solution. It is the primary thing V-Maestro talks to it to automate this process, but this can just give you an idea of the steps that it takes when going through it. Like I said, migrating only what is required. You see that check box there, and we'll see this in the demo as well. It's going to walk through it. We can either allow you to select or unselect or automatically bring in through V-Monitor only those application components that are required, only those services that are required, only those accounts that are required, any kind of weird objects on the operating itself. One of the key things as well is as you're moving into a new environment, remapping IP addresses and host names on the fly. you're probably going to have different host names, and you're going to need a different DNS infrastructure as you migrate things to the cloud. The V-Migrate solution allows you to configure that on the fly through the application. It does it automatically, so that you don't have to worry about going back and reconfiguring all of those things and making sure things that all your applications and their server dependencies can communicate effectively. And then the key thing, again, is no install media or source code is required. That's how we're able to help our clients migrate those deprecated legacy applications whose vendors don't exist anymore. We isolate the application or abstract the application away from the operating system, figure out what components, what files are needed, and we move those over. The nice thing is, at the end of the day, you can dissolve our app and take away any dependency that your application has on ours. So it's as though it's natively installed on the new operating system. If it then has a supported migration path to upgrade the application itself, because you now have an older app on a new operating system, it should be supported by the vendor, as opposed to, no, you have to go through this complicated process of upgrading the OS one version at a time. You can bring it straight from 2003 to 2016, and then you can work internally or with your vendor to upgrade that application right away. So before I hand things off to Scott, I just want to give you a quick overview of how the technology itself works. This is specifically V-Migrate. So there's always, two or more things that we have to worry about. We've got a destination server, which is where you want your application to be. And then there's a source server, or there's multiple source servers, and that's where your application currently resides. So we install our application and create a Virta container on the destination server. We then configure that to connect back to the source server, either manually or automatically using V-Modder and V-Maestro. Pick out the application's components and dependencies that are required for that source application to run. We then pre-populate, which is just bring them over to the destination server. Once everything's been compressed, encrypted, migrated over, it is now running. We now have this application that's sitting and running in the Virta application container, and we can actually see as it calls down into the operating system. So if we've missed any components, we can detect them and then go back and grab them and bring them over as well, which is where the exercise comes in. It's the first engagement with a QA or other subject matter expert to just run through some basic acceptance tests to see if everything came over smoothly. And then finally, we dissolve the Virta container, and it's now as though the application itself has been natively installed in that operating system. And that's another time to bring the QA guys and run through those acceptance tests again. So just to hand things over to Scott, that's at a high level what we're going to see today on a demo specific to the Azure environment. Scott, you there?
Yeah, absolutely, Michael.
All right, so I'll just make you presenter now.
Perfect.
And take it away.
All right. Thanks. Just make sure the audience view catches up. We're all good. So we've got is just a short video demo of a migration of IAS from an old 2003 server to 2012 R2. So like every other migration that we do, we don't need to have anything installed other than our Virta software. We perform everything through the administrative console. I'm just selecting IAS here and then beginning the pre-population process. Of course, I've already done a few of the simple catch-up stuff, creating the container and connecting back using our source agent to that source machine itself, right? The source agent allows for an encrypted connection to that guy and to the source machine. And we've already done the roles and features, so now we just go through our dock process, bringing that IAS application to life on the destination server. Once it's docked, we basically go through user acceptance testing, which we call exercise, and it's just starting the IAS services that we've now installed on the underlying OS itself, and it gives us visibility into iNet Manager and everything else. Once those services are started, we can actually browse to the web page itself, and we'll do that in a quick second here. But basically, we brought everything over through our process, and starting these services again is the part of making sure that everything's brought over successfully, right? We need to bring the INET manager up and all of the associated services. Once these guys are running, again, we can go in and get that application up and running and have it visible through the regular method that you would have. So this guy is actually locally hosted, so we would bring up the web page just through Internet Explorer or whatever other browser is kind of the default for this server. It's a pretty straightforward process, really, especially for IIS. We don't have to install the any of the web or any of the roles and features. We take care of that portion of things, and you can see the web pages come up pretty gracefully. We haven't had to go through any configuration or anything else. I can actually launch the INET manager through our administrative console, bring it to life as well, and you'll notice that the INET manager is the correct version for the underlying OS that we're on. So it is IIS 8 here, right? So we have done the up-leveling on that side of things. Again, we're just installing or bringing to life the roles and features, and then we're migrating over all of the web pools and accounts associated with the IIS website itself, and you can see all of those there now active. Now, we could continue to have that running within the context of our VA container, but most of our clients really just want to push to the dissolve stage. So this would be installing on a permanent basis all of the web features, so all of the accounts, the roles and features, the web pools, everything associated with the IIS website. Of course, it's asking for a quick reboot to have those services pushed correctly and such, so we'll reboot that server and bring everything to life, make sure it's working correctly. We'll just jump in here. All those services would have started automatically. It's the same designated as they were on that source machine, and the website should come up pretty gracefully here. So as you can see, we've got everything up and running. No configuration done on my part. I haven't done anything on the IIS side. I'm not an IIS expert, but we do move those types of things, again, gracefully and quickly and easily to cloud environments, including Azure. And you can see we have the web pools and everything else for the website listed here. So that's basically what we do on the IIS side, and we can do that with any other applications directly to destination servers sitting locally, as Michael indicated, but also up to cloud environments, again, including Azure as well. So I don't know if there's any last bits that you wanted to add, Michael?
No, that was it. It's just, in a nutshell, doesn't really matter which applications we can work with you to migrate. Just understand that expertise specific to each application is no longer required, because the Virta Move toolset, regardless of where you're going, can help you understand and abstract your application away from the operating system, its dependencies, migrate everything over, and have it working as though we're natively installed. So feel free to reach out if there's any additional questions on any of what you've seen here today, and we'll be sure to get back to you. There'll also be, we can send out a copy of the slides, or a link to the video will be posted to the website afterwards, I'm sure, and then you can have access to that for your reference in the future. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. It was a pleasure hosting you through the application migration to Microsoft Azure.
Thanks, Michael. That's perfect. I was just having a quick look if there was any questions submitted through the webinar, but there weren't any. So I guess we've done a great job here, and I want to thank everyone for their time. Thanks, Michael, for sharing your side of things, and we'll chat with everyone later. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody.